Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Dennis Giannoutzis. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutzis.
Thanks so much, Dennis, for having me on. I'm a big fan of the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to have you here. Now, whereabouts in the world are you today?
I'm in New York City, right smack in the middle.
Smack in the middle. What does smack in the middle mean?
So there's I don't know how well you know New York or your listeners know New York, but there's an uptown and a downtown, and there's boroughs, 5 different boroughs in the city. I'm right in the center of Manhattan, or just a little bit north of the center of Manhattan. Midtown is where all the work happens, or when people used to go to the office, that's where all the work offices are. And I live just a little bit north of that. So a big hub of activity.
Yeah, interesting. And when you say they used to go to the office, it's really interesting how things have changed. So in where you are right now in New York City, there are people going to this office? How many are going to the office? In other words, percentage wise, or is the city feeling a little bit more of a dead city, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it changes a little over time. I feel like the city life has come back and it's vibrant again, and it's super hard to get restaurant reservations, and you see just people out and about at the parks are full. It's wintertime now, so it's a little colder, but up until then you saw people coming back out. So people are certainly out and about, but I don't think people are coming into the office as much. And I think a lot of people are, at least half the week, some people more than that. There are some industries like banking, for example, in New York, where they really want people in every day. And so there's those, I think, exceptions. They're outliers. All the tech workers, people that I know, are home as much as they're in the office, and they have a lot more flexibility. And I think this is something we can get into in the conversation, but that's really something for companies to figure out is what does this look like moving forward? What are the policies? Do they leave it up to the employees? Are they going to be rigid about what they want? And so it's really interesting to see, but a lot of people at home and getting really comfortable being at home.
Amazing how the dynamics have gone from, no, you can't work at home, you have to work from the office, and then gone because of the pandemic the other way around. And now trying to swing back again, but it's not swinging back too well. And some organizations are handling it very well and others are struggling. And it's really interesting to see the whole dynamic play out as we see it going forward. So we'll see what happens there. So Ernie, go on.
No, you go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Perfect summation.
Hey, the other thing here, Ernie, is I've given the listeners already an introduction to you on the show. Now, you've got a vast experience here as a media executive for 20 plus years of experience. Tell us a little more about your background.
I grew up in Boston, which is, again, I don't know where your readers are, but not that far from New York. Boston and New York are actually sports rivals. So I grew up in Boston and then went away to college and spent a couple of years living in Japan, teaching English right after college, and then came back and knew I wanted to be a reporter. So I went to journalism school, and then I did I'm not sure if this is the track these days, but back in the day, the track was you worked at a bunch of smaller media companies as you tried to work your way up to different kinds of publications. And so I did that, and I lived in 5 or 6 different cities, and then lived in LA and San Diego and Chicago and Washington, and then moved to Hong Kong and worked for the Wall Street Journal. And I stayed at the Wall Street Journal for 10 years, both in Hong Kong and in New York as an editor, managing reporters and managing sections of the paper and managing coverage areas, helping to launch new sections. And then in 2008, I was interested in getting more experience in digital media. And the Journal was one of the early media companies to digital. They had a site that they charged money for, more importantly, in the 90s. Again, way before other people were thinking about it. This is when people were still thinking digital was just something it was a flash in the pan and it was going to go away. It was a trend, but not a permanent trend. And so they had a site, and a successful site. I really wanted to get experience with something that was more natively digital. And so I went and started working at digital media startups and spent the next decade working at digital media startups in a editorial strategy, content strategy kind of role. So again, managing content and teams of content producers across all different kinds of mediums. So text, of course, but video and email newsletters and podcasts and social and all kinds of things like that. A couple of years ago, I joined Pioneering Collective, where I work now. I'm a strategist at Pioneer Collective. And so I work with leaders of all kinds, mostly business leaders, on their personal brand, personal communications, helping to build the brand, clarify the brand, and then amplify it through all kinds of different communications. So we do a lot of thought leadership articles and help some people write books and launch podcasts. We also do strategic introductions, and we do all kinds of coaching for them. So it's a great job and a great opportunity to meet a lot of really interesting leaders.
Oh, wow. What a fascinating background and the things that you do today as well. I just got a quick question here, which is burning since you said it, was living in New York and coming from Boston. Do you walk down the road with a baseball cap with a big B on it, or do you have the NY on yours?
I still have the B on mine, and I don't have a problem with it, but it's interesting. My kids were born in New York, and so they've grown up hearing me talk about Boston sports teams, and I don't envy them going to school and talking about Boston teams. They're pretty bold. They have to say they're not afraid to tell their friends that they're a Boston fan, but I've stuck to my guns. I'm a Boston fan through and through.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, you've seen, based on what you just shared with us about your background, a lot of transition in the media industry, going from pre-digital into digital and to things like podcasts and things like that. What was that transition like for you, of seeing it over the years, of the experience that you've got? Well, how was it?
Really interesting, I think. I just enjoyed being there when things were emerging. I think when you see things emerging, unless you're one of these super smart, innovative, ahead of the curve thinkers, and they exist in all different industries, I think most people don't know if 6 new platforms pop up or 6 new formats in media pop up. I don't think most people know which ones are going to be there in 10 years and which aren't going to be there in 10 years. And so there's a lot of sort of experimentation in those early years and trying to, I'll call it dabbling, although maybe that's not the right word, but have a finger in some different things that are going on so that you can be there when these things, when 1 or 2 or 3 of them do emerge and are sustainable. But it's so interesting to see. There was a long period when there was very little innovation in media. It was, at least in the US, each market was controlled by a newspaper or 2, a couple TV stations, a couple radio stations. And if you wanted to get a story out or get advertising out, you had to go through one of those gatekeepers. And then suddenly, in a really short period of time, probably in, 5 or 10 years, the landscape had absolutely shifted, first with blogging and then with all kinds of different things like social and podcasting. And now it's almost the inverse of what it was. Of course, there's still top publications where people that are real influence shapers, but the landscape is so fractured, and there's a lot of people essentially creating their own media. They're not part of any companies. They're influencers and they're creators, and they have the ability to bring audiences and develop monetization. And so we really, in the 20 years that I've been in the business, gone from, I think, flipped completely the model. And of course, one thing that hasn't changed, I think in the 20 years ago, if you were at one of those quasi-monopolistic media companies, you did pretty well, I think, because you had a lock on the market. What's happened now is that there's been a real renaissance, a real opening up of the media, and that's great. It's really hard to make money. And so that's the caveat here, is that anybody can put their shingle out and have sort of a media business or a platform, but it's not really easy for anybody to make it a going concern.
Yeah, it's obvious that the whole industry has been disrupted, of course, over time. And it's amazing to see that whole transition happen and where it's gone. And Ernie, I know that you've actually launched your podcast as well, and it's called You Said What? Tell us a little bit more about the podcast.
Sure. I'm a real newbie, Dennis, next to you. I know you have 380 episodes or whatever it is now. I think 25, so I'm a baby, but it's a podcast about, I talk to guests about the most important conversations and written interchanges in their lives. And it can be with anybody. It can be with a child, with a parent, with a boss, with a coworker, with a significant other, with a stranger. And it's really trying to talk to people about which of those communications experiences really stuck with people and why, and how did they, in some cases, change their worldview about things. And so I, like you, like to interview people and like to learn. And so it's a great excuse for me to meet people from different walks of life. I've had ex-NFL football players on, Broadway actors, founders and CEOs, private investigators, all different kinds of folks. And it's been interesting for me to A, hear their stories, but B, also think more about what kinds of conversations do stick with us. And it's not always the most obvious things. It's not always, sometimes you're going to have a profound conversation with somebody. And of course, it ends up being meaningful and profound. And then other times, there's moments where you don't necessarily think anything's going to happen, and suddenly something happens that stays with you for years. And so I find that really interesting. There's depth. What I found is there can be a lot of depth in sort of small communications moments, and you don't always know it's going to happen.
Mm. Yeah, wow. It's almost like those turning points in life, right? There's those things that happen and they do stay with you for a long time, but they also can be life-changing situations or moments or words or whatever that is. And it's amazing where things go that we weren't expecting it.
So I started my business when I was 17 doing rock climbing equipment, and right away started to deal with military units and special operations groups who were buying ropes and harnesses and carabiners. And my mantra was I didn't want to be a sales guy. I wanted to understand the product and be of value to my consumer and kind of add value. And I didn't really understand it in those terms at that point, but that's what I wanted to do. So I spent a great deal of time studying and learning about the product, and was fortunate enough that the first real clients I had in law enforcement and military were the founders of SWAT as a concept in the United States. And I always say that I learned to hit from Babe Ruth and I learned to dance from Fred Astaire. And so I was brought up by those guys. At my 20s, I went to law school. I spent 2 years working in LAPD's police litigation unit, worked on Rodney King, Reginald Denny, a bunch of the big law enforcement cases. And the business just went in that direction. And now 8 years later, we do primarily law enforcement and military equipment, mostly protective equipment, and really geared towards tactical operators. So people that would do tactical intervention, whether it's Navy SEALs or LAPD SWAT or Australian Defense Forces type of operators.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, we're going to really look forward to this conversation. It's going to be really good. We're going to get into some areas as well. Now, I also understand that you've done some Ironman triathlons, into racing sports cars. You do some speaking on with tactical organizations across the US. Anything else you like doing?
Yeah, no, I like sports that take me to uncomfortable places. I learned early on, both as a leader and a human being, that the more time I spend pushing my own boundaries, whether that's putting myself in situations where I'm scared, putting myself in situations where I don't know what I'm doing, or in the case of racing, putting myself in situations where I'm overwhelmed and have to learn an entirely new discipline, that is really where I grow and how I develop. And so that's kind of everything that I do for fun is geared towards pushing my own limits.
Mm. Mm. When you say that, because I think it's really interesting that I think in leadership today, whatever the field or industry is, are we pushing ourselves enough today as leaders? Are we taking it to the boundaries, the limits? What are we doing? We are facing times, or we face things at times, which are the unknown, right? The ambiguity. We're not sure. We don't even know what we're doing sometimes. Do you think leaders are actually pushing themselves enough?
No, absolutely not. And COVID certainly hurt this, right? COVID kind of sent us all back to our caves to wall ourselves off and be afraid that the plague was going to get us. I think it triggered a lot of primitive thoughts for a lot of people. And I think for lack of a better term, if you're familiar with Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think COVID pushed us all back down the triangle. And I think the result is that a lot of leaders have become managers. They've become reactionary. And we've been dealing with so many difficult situations and so much change over the last few years that it's become very easy to avoid development and to avoid true leadership. So no, I don't think we are, not even close.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with you totally. I think they are avoiding things as well. What can we do with leaders today to say to them, hey, you need to wake up, you need to step up, you need to not avoid things. Any ideas on what you think should actually happen here to help them?
I think the first thing is that every leader should, if you lead a group of 2 people, one of your primary objectives should be developing yourself, should be focusing on making you as good at your job as you can possibly be, and helping you to understand what it is to lead other people and what it is to care about culture and how to set a culture and lead a culture. And I think that one of the things that I've learned in dealing with so many military units and so many special operations groups and just amazing leaders is the really effective units, the really elite units are elite because they are brilliant at fundamentals. They spend a great deal of time focusing on all of the little things and the execution of the little things. And it's interesting. I just recently interviewed a guy named Master Sergeant Earl Plumley, who's a Congressional Medal of Honor winner for Afghanistan, who, if you listen to the episode, the story will literally just make you light your man card on fire. It is a ridiculous story. You wouldn't believe it if it was a movie. One of the things Earl said when I talked to him was what enabled him to perform at such a high level was that all of the little things, marksmanship, reloading, movement, tactical awareness, they had drilled into him so many times that he didn't think about them anymore. And I think as leaders, we need to understand the basics of leading people and the basics of what those who work for us do at a very deep level so we can focus on the higher aspects.
Mm. And I think there's a few things that you're sharing there. The basics is really important. And I think some people try to make it too fancy. No, let's go back to the basics. Keep it simple. 1. 2 is drill it, keep going, keep practicing, keep doing what you need to do, then it becomes second nature. Third thing would be is that eye for detail. And it's what you're saying is about the execution of it, that it's focusing on it so good, so well, that it does become elite. And I think that it's becoming the master of what you do is really important.
I think as leaders, it's also easy, especially as young leaders, it's easy to think that your job is to manage people. I always say systems are managed, right? Quality is managed. Air conditioning systems are managed. People are led. And as a leader, your job is to develop the people who work for you to get as much out of them as you can. I always say that each person has 100% potential. And some of those have 100% potential that's 100%. And some of them have 100% potential that's 70%. Your job is to get the full 70%. It's to get the full 100%. And the only way that happens is if you are focused on developing them and caring for them and providing an environment where they can flourish. It's too often people look at it as, oh, my job is to hit them with a stick when they get out of line. But your job is to make sure they don't get out of line. Your job is to create an environment for them where they thrive and are happy and are enjoying their job and can be passionate about what they're doing so that they never have to get out of line. And that's one of the differences for me between management and leadership, right? Management is constantly hitting people with a stick. Leadership is never needing to use the stick.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing is about you setting them up for success straight away. And I love what you just said there. Create an environment where they thrive. I think that's spot on. Now, you mentioned a couple of times just before about, and you got this episode and so forth. So you've got your podcast yourself, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's called The Debrief. And it's focused on tactical topics. I interview law enforcement, military leaders, influential people that kind of created the market or people that have been through harrowing events. It's really focused on a tactical audience that we have a crossover business audience that listens to it because they're all amazing leaders. But it's really focused on trying to provide the tactical community with paradigms, right? So much of what they do, much like leading, so much of what you do is paradigm-based decision-making, right? You look at something and you go, I always use the example of water, right? There's 3 forms of water, solid, liquid, and gas. If you only know water as a liquid, you don't understand solid and gas, right? Once you've seen ice, then you know, oh, that's frozen water. But if you don't, you have to draw inferences. And so much in a tactical environment, the decision-making is inferential. This situation is like this other situation, except there's this difference. Same thing with doctors, right? They look at it and they're like, oh, this is... So part of the goal of the podcast is to capture the stories of these guys so that other people can hear them and file them away. So when they find themselves in those situations, they have that paradigm. And what I realized early on is we're in such a small industry that there's no formalized vehicle for a lot of that information to get out. So I recently interviewed one of the team leaders for the Bataclan hostage rescue in Paris and went through the whole story. Now, very few people in the US are ever going to interact with these guys. They're never going to hear this story firsthand. So by creating a platform to share these stories, now every tactical officer, military person in the world, theoretically, can listen to that. And that's one more paradigm. So that's really the primary goal of the podcast is officer safety.
Yeah. Okay, good. And so what sort of made you decide to start that podcast?
So I've spent almost my entire adult life invisible to the internet. I was invisible for 35 years. I always kept myself out of it. I didn't really write much outside of the tactical community. I didn't give public presentations. And a few years back, one of our friends got ALS and died. And there were several of us standing at his funeral and having a conversation about how much information we lost that day. This is a guy with 60 years of experience, both military and law enforcement. He's a fusion thinker. He understands both doctrines and can put them together and teach. And He was an amazing guy. His name was Tim Anderson. When Tim died, the tactical community lost everything in Tim's head because we had never recorded him on video. He had never been recorded on audio. He hadn't written a book. And so all that information was gone. And I remember saying to a couple of the guys at the funeral, we need to do something about this. Somebody needs to capture these lessons learned. Somebody needs to interview these guys. Somebody needs to write this stuff down. And one of them pointed out the problem for law enforcement in the military, and I know it's true in the US and North America and Europe, and I'm sure it's probably true in New Zealand. There is no upside for law enforcement or military to talk to the media. They're not going to win, because if they say 99 smart things and one stupid thing, the one stupid thing will lead the newscast that night, and the 99 things will be on the floor. So they said, look, if you want to do that, you're going to have to do it, because we're not going to talk to just anybody. We got to talk to somebody we know we can trust, that is not going to twist the messaging and will actually put out the true stories. And after several months of conversations with people, I realized that I could trade my privacy for their legacy. Mm-hmm. And that was a good trade, because the amount of knowledge to be gained by listening to these guys and hearing their stories and hearing their views on leadership and the way they solve problems and make decisions is so great that it was worth the trade. So that was when we started the podcast. It was just over a year ago.
Jason, great to have you here. Big welcome to you.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Dennis.
Excellent. Now, Jason, whereabouts in the world are you today?
I am in Denver, Colorado.
And have you always been in Denver?
I haven't. So I've been in Denver nearly the last 11 years. I'm a native 5th generation Texan and was in Dallas prior to being here. And I have to say, back home, I think it's about 98 degrees today Fahrenheit. And here in Denver, it's a lovely 75 degrees and sunny. So it's the perfect fall weather.
Yeah, excellent. So you're in fall, we're in spring in this part of the world. And so we're going, we actually this weekend, tomorrow we're going to daylight saving. So we're going towards our summer. But Dallas, I love that area in the sense that I used to go there a lot with, of course, EDS and then HP days as well, and just a tremendous place. And when they actually talked to me about moving to the US a few times, and it was either going to be in the Bay Area, of course, with HP, but in the days of EDS, I was like being in Palo Alto, that area, in Plano and that area in Dallas. And I was like, oh, they said, where do you want to live? I went to Texas. And I went, what? I went, yeah, I want to go in Texas. I love it. And yeah, it's a great place to be. Yeah.
It is a good place.
Now, we're going to be asking you a whole lot of questions today, but before we go there, tell us a little bit more about your background.
So my background, long story short, is I had a career in heavy highway road construction and real estate support services for a long time. When 2008 happened, that changed the world and lives of so many people. And I was one of those people that was also affected by that. And through the course of the next several years, really went through a dark night of the soul that kind of led me to do the work that I'm doing. And from that experience, morphed into doing mental health supportive work. In the very beginning, I will lovingly call it a breakthrough now, but I had what is known as a breakdown. And from doing so, really had the good fortune of being able to decide what I wanted to do for my future, moving on and rebuilding my life. So the foundation that I have today is really built upon some of the darkest times of my life, but it has been related to mental health and supporting those who struggle with mental health. So currently I wear a couple of hats. I am the president and CEO of the National Alliance on Mental Illness for NAMI for Arapahoe and Douglas counties, which is the largest affiliate in the state of Colorado. So we offer education, support, and outreach services for people struggling with chronic or persistent mental illness. And then I also have an organization that I'm the founder and president of called Connection Project. And Connection Project, in its essence, was designed to simply strengthen and deepen connection to ourselves and others. What that looks like, tactically speaking, is we build social impact campaigns that connect vulnerable or marginalized communities to resources and support resources specifically that they can utilize in times of struggle and or crisis. And with what we've all been through in the last couple of years, we just see those needs continuing to evolve and expand. And so our work, while I have done much so far, I feel like we've just scratched the surface and have miles to go in how we better show up to support people who are struggling.
Fantastic. This is the reason, listeners, why I got Jason to be on the show today, is because from the work that you've been doing, Jason, I think it's very important, but I think it's very special as well, the work that you and the organization is doing. And that's why I wanted to talk about this topic in relation to leadership and where we're going with the mental health side of things as well, because I don't know about you, but the way I'm looking at things, that, and even with the pandemic, that we've gone through. One was the pandemic, but I think there's another pandemic, and that's the mental health side of things, whereby people are going through all sorts of things. So first of all, I want to say to you, thank you for all the work that you're doing around that, the mental awareness, the mental health side of things. I think it's so important, and we just needed more. I don't know if in New Zealand, we have one of the highest suicide rates in the world, and if not number one. And it's really sad to see. So cool. So we're going to get into some conversations here and that. Is there anything else in the background you want to share? Any other passions and hobbies and things that you do?
I'm a pretty engaged guy. I like to engage my creativities as much as I can. I'm an artist. I like to paint. I love to garden. I really just like to be able to be out in nature, clear my mind, and give myself an opportunity to reset, to do what can often be tremendously hard work and unpacking people's stories and the things that they struggle with. But I think it's all interconnected. And frankly, me taking care of me is as important as me taking care of other people.
Excellent. Yep. Good point. Now, Jason, how did you get into leadership?
I guess in retrospect, I've always been in leadership in some capacity. I've always been an entrepreneur, you would say. I worked in a family road construction business for many years. And in that capacity, I oversaw the work in our subsidiary companies and always had quite a few direct reports under me. And just, I think one thing stacked upon the other. I think I was born a natural leader. I was president of honor society in college or different clubs and stuff. I just always have aspired to, how can we take something that exists and how can we collaborate with other people to make it better, grow it, expand it, whatever the results or outcome we're seeking. I like to be in the middle of that.
Okay, good. Very good. And tell me something, the leadership that you have today, how big is the organizations from the Connection Project or from the mental health side of things? How big is your organization?
That's a great question. So NAMI specifically, like I said, I lead the largest affiliate in the state of Colorado. NAMI is a national organization and then has state representation in every state. But the actual work to support the humans that are struggling actually happens at an affiliate level. So the counties that I lead are comprised of roughly 1 million people.
Wow.
So if you take the statistics of 1 in 4, if that's what you subscribe to, we have the reach and capacity to support 250,000 people. Most of my work is really done through community outreach and networking, and it is supported by, I have a wonderful team that is a group of contractors and employees who help support me with the various projects we have. But really, as far as reach and capacity, we build digital campaigns, social impact campaigns that have the ability to scale and reach millions of people and have had considerable success doing that in either organization.
That 1 in 4 stats, is that stats that are in the US or is that around the world?
That is what I know is US stats. I don't actually know what around the world stats are. That would be something good to look at. I venture to guess it's probably at least that, if not more so. That's really what's reported and what we know. Again, I think the pandemic really changed a lot of things. And with mental health specifically, what it did is it gave people an opportunity to talk about things that they're struggling with. And you'll notice I use that word struggle a lot. In fact, my Connection Project tagline is everyone struggles. And really, I have chosen that intentionally to get above the fray of just talking about mental health, because I think the fact of the matter is we all go through things in life, transitions, loss of a job, loss of a loved one, pet, relationship, you name it, that we maybe don't show up in the best way that we want to. And there are things that can be a setback for us. And I don't think they necessarily imply that you have a mental illness or have sustained poor mental health. But I think we have to change the lens of how we invite people to talk about things that they're going through. And frankly, the current system, at least here in the United States, always begins and ends with scary, sad, and traumatic stories. And frankly, I think we can do better. I don't think we have to share our most painful points of life from this sad, scary, traumatic place. It can just be an experience that we're going through, and we want to be able to have people and places to unpack that and heal from.
So if leaders are feeling or going through things, because I think sometimes it creeps up from behind and it doesn't, you wake up one morning and go, ta-da, yeah, there's a mental health issue here or there's something going on for you. It creeps up. And I think for a lot of people, they don't know where to go, what to do, or even to recognize it. Where do you think they should go? Every country is going to be different. Of course, the listeners here are global, so they're going to be different organizations within their countries and that. But is there any things that they should be aware of or they should be looking out for themselves or even for their employees as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And there's a couple of things that I look at there. The reality is for most people, when you start talking about mental health, the blinds come down for many people. So until it hits your home, you don't really know what the resources are. And I don't think it's something that people just seek out to learn about just because. I can use my own personal experience as an example. I'm educated, successful, resourced, supportive family. And when I went through my dark night of the soul, I literally had no idea about where to begin. And it was actually my mom doing some research and finding NAMI, and she and my dad did a course to support family members and loved ones. And then I joined a support group and then moved up to now being the president and CEO in that organization over the last decade. I think the internet is a wonderful resource or place to start, but I think it begins with first recognizing you are not alone. I think so many of us, especially as leaders or entrepreneurs, we ascend in our careers and we think that, gosh, it's the world against us. And from that perspective, you can really put yourself into a trap of recognizing that there are other people right where you are who absolutely will understand what you're going through. So, if you can get past the reality that you're not alone and you can open the door and even attempt to look for some help to support yourselves, I think that's a starting point. What I will say that I know is nothing that we are ashamed of can live in the light. And a lot of times I think from that we are alone perspective, many people suffer far longer than they have to just because they're unwilling to crack the door and take a look. That's first step. Second step, finding resources. I think it's important to look at what are the specific resources that are available to you and to have an open mind around what are the steps you're willing to take. Traditional mental health systems assume that you might see a therapist, that you might take meds, and if God forbid something's bad enough, you might be in a treatment facility. I don't think everybody starts there. I don't think most people end up there after steps 2 or 3 usually, but I think you have to have an open mind. What are you willing to do? From my perspective, in some of the darkest times, I think things that we can start with, getting 15 minutes of sun on your head, taking a walk around the block. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you drinking enough water? Have you taken a chance to write down 3 things that you're grateful for? Because even in our darkest moments, we can find things to be grateful for. Those to me are the self-empowerment tools that become the foundation for taking the next right steps to support yourself if you really need some additional interventions.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.